Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Conley. I'm the Garrett County 4-H Youth Development Agent, and today I'm sitting down with somebody that, I've known for a long time, middle school, even before middle school. I mean, I was a substitute teacher for her in middle school. But anyway, this is Emily Dowd, and she's an occupational therapist, and she's joining me today on 4-H Career Conversations. How are you doing, Emily?
I am so great. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and so I'm excited about hearing about your career because we talked a little bit before this, and I told you that my daughter has an interest in what you're doing, and so I'm hoping that she'll watch this and get a little bit more information. So the first question that I always ask is, what do you remember wanting to be when you grew up?
I'm pretty sure like rock star, actress, all those typical things. But to be honest, I never really gave a lot of serious thought to that I can think of until maybe later high school years. And at those points, I kind of started dabbling of, okay, what am I good at? What do I feel like I could do? What kind of people do I want to be around? So I thought about maybe being a teacher. I thought about maybe being a guidance counselor. My first college major was actually journalism. And to be honest, I had never, ever even heard of occupational therapy until I was halfway through my sophomore year of college. My roommate actually decided that she was going to be an OT, and I read about it and I was like, well, I want to teach, I want to counsel, I want to be able to write and research. That sounds like I can pretty much do all that in this job. So I'm going to switch to a new school and pick that as my major.
Excellent. And the reason I asked the next question and the next question is, what was your first job? And then, so there's two, and this one is going to be a little bit of a curveball from what I sent you, but I want to know if there was a job that you had that you didn't apply for. And then I want to know what your first job was that you actually had to fill out an application, because I think that's one of the things that can be a little bit scary for young people is having to fill out an application
Mhm.
and understanding that, even in the most, and I'm calling a job menial, but in like a beginning job, you're still going to have to fill out an application. So what were those jobs? What was the first job maybe that you had that you didn't have to fill out an application, and one that you did have to fill out an application?
I'm actually glad you asked that because I wrote down both of these answers just in
Oh, good.
case. Aside from, babysitting, I did that during summers before it was legal for me to hold employment. Once I was of legal working age, which I believe in Kentucky at the time was 14 or 15, I had the opportunity to do a co-op experience from my high school. And my first job was actually a bank teller, um, which was not a job that I had to go in and apply for, but thankfully this local bank was supportive of high schoolers getting exposure to the work environment. And so that was the first thing I did was count money and cash checks and give suckers.
So you didn't have to apply for that job.
I did not have to apply for that job, with the caveat that I did have a familial connection that kind of led me to doing that. But the bank was really happy to offer that kind of exposure. I was just there for, 3 to 4 hours a day, sitting in my own little window. But it was really an opportunity more so that was given me through taking the co-op experience in high school, which it just happened to work out that way. I had a few extra credits and was eager to do something besides sit in a classroom. So, and it was a great first experience. Talk about just interpersonal relationships, and working with all adults in a pretty formal and professional setting was a really good exposure, I think, at that age.
So what about your first applied job?
My first applied job was a seasonal role at Kohl's in Nicholasville, Kentucky, um, where I'm going to go ahead and say this. You may have to edit it out. My job title was POS, which was point of sale,
Okay, that's fine.
which meant that I was a cashier. So I took my first job there in the Christmas season, and then thankfully they kept me on in a part-time role after the seasonal part ended, and I moved to the men's department.
No.
But that was my first actual sit down with a manager, have an interview, have to request time off, and then having to give my first resignation, which I remember having to go to my mom about, how do you do that? Are they going to be mad at me?
So now skipping ahead to what you do now as an
Uh-huh.
occupational therapist, you had said that you went to EKU, and so talk
Hmm.
a little bit about what the educational requirements are for what you do as an occupational
Sure.
therapist.
Sure, absolutely. They evolve. I feel like they've evolved pretty rapidly. At the time that I entered my program, we had just transitioned from a bachelor's to a master's as an entry level, meaning that you had to graduate not only with your bachelor's degree, but then go on to 2 additional years of graduate school in order to sit for your licensure, which I can talk about that. Now we're in kind of another little influx. I believe that 2027 is when the new educational mandate comes into place, and it will be an entry level doctorate. And when I say that, it's a clinical doctorate, it's not a PhD program. So it's a slight extension of graduate school that adds, I believe, another 12 to 16 months onto your program. That gives you more exposure to kind of the research side of things as opposed to the clinical. So as of right now, graduate school and a master's degree is entry level, but pretty soon that will move into a higher level. But I want to kind of highlight that I realize that that can sound very intimidating. And I remember very much feeling that way. I was the first and only college graduate in my family. And I remember even when I was just going for my bachelor's, kind of being like, yeah, thinking of going on to more, thinking of a master's degree. And that sounded so grandiose at the time. And the amount of time involved, the work involved, the money involved, that's a very practical element that you have to think about. Because I'm still just a Eastern Kentucky kid from Garrett County. So I hope that people don't necessarily hear about those educational requirements and count themselves out. It is an incredibly enriching field. And I will say that you also are compensated for your work at a level that is equivalent to the education that you receive. So the good news about receiving more education is it's going to give you a more stable and larger income in the grand scheme. And the school element of it is not just limited to time in the classroom. You actually spend a pretty significant amount of your time out in the clinic and working as a therapist under the supervision of someone else as a part of your education. So very real world training is involved in that entire process.
So the next question is, beyond the education. So, specifically, tell me what it is that you do as an occupational therapist.
Sure. So if I had to nail it down to just a sentence that would cover all the different areas that we work in, we help people live the most independent lives possible, regardless of what age, regardless of what group, regardless of what healthcare or non-healthcare setting that you're in. Our ultimate goal is to help people live the most independent lives that they can. I've worked in a large variety of settings. I did a little bit in school setting, working with students, helping them be more successful at school. I currently work in pediatric home health. I've worked at a children's hospital. I've worked in a NICU. I've worked in an outpatient pediatric clinic where you're helping kids overcome developmental challenges, maybe working with kids who have various, diseases or syndromes that have limited their physical development or emotional or mental development. I've also worked in adult care. I've worked in inpatient rehab where, maybe I was working with people that were bouncing back from cancer, coming back from a really intense surgery, or, someone who was in a car accident and had orthopedic injuries and so forth. So regardless of which setting that you're in, our goals are always towards helping people live as independently as we can in whatever means that requires. Sometimes it's adapting their life to better fit, where their body currently is. And sometimes it's helping their body return to the state where it once was. I even know there's OTs that work in mental health and community settings. We even had some therapists who did a field work when I was in school working with young teenage mothers, teaching them mothering skills, teaching them about lactation, so the possibilities are really endless as far as who you can work with and where you can work, but it all just comes down to helping people live independent lives.
Okay, excellent. So the next couple of questions. One, I'll start out with. I'll start out with challenges and then I'll go to joys because, you know, I always want to
Sure.
with the positives. But
Swoop
so
back in with the happiness.
absolutely. So what are the challenges of what you do?
Sure. I would say one that does get talked about pretty frequently, it's something that we call compassion fatigue. So generally people who go into our field have a big heart and they care for people. Like we're just people who want to help other people at the end of the day. And, you know, you have to consider that we're generally working with people going through some pretty traumatic circumstances. We're dealing with people who have had a sudden loss of independence due to an accident or an illness. You know, sometimes we're working with very fragile babies, you know, coming out of the NICU or dealing with, you know, different challenges then. So it does require, you know, a lot of practice, especially early in your career, to develop some preservation skills so that you don't let it completely exhaust the emotional part of you. That can definitely be a challenge. But on the flip side, and I'll talk about it with the joys, you know, there is a flip side to working with people in such, in what can sometimes be such a low point in their life and you being such a highlight, but it definitely can come as a challenge. In certain settings, the physicality, when I worked in inpatient rehab, you know, you do a lot of physical work in lifting, helping people to stand up who maybe haven't stood up in 3 months because of a fracture or something like that. So it can be very physically demanding. Although I will say a lot of therapists tend to be movers and shakers. We tend to be people who like to be moving and going during the day. And it's good for us to get our workout in during the day. You also, and this was something that when I was in school, we really struggled with as students, but you understand once you're out, you never really work in isolation in this field. There is a lot of interdisciplinary work. And so it requires that you develop relationships and work to get along with a lot of different people who may or may not have the same opinions as you. And, you know, there's times when you have some power and control in that situation, and there's lots of times where you're also making lots of compromise. So it can be a challenge to have to work with large groups of people, to work in large hospital settings or things of that nature, and, you know, all the different kind of constraints that come with that. Time management is really big. It's something that you definitely develop over time, but it can be a challenge, especially if you have a patient who just wants to share something with you or is having an emotional moment, you know, wanting to talk through something, and you care and you want to be in that moment so bad, but you're also thinking like, oh, I have so many other patients I have to go see. So it can be a challenge because there is a lot of work to put into a small amount of time. But like anything, you know, the more you do it, the longer you do it, those skills really hone in, and you become very good at segues. And I think the unknown is one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're newer. You know, I've been doing this for 10 years now, so there's not a lot of situations that I walk into that I haven't had some sort of exposure to, or had a coworker or a colleague that has had some exposure to, that we've kind of talked through. But it can be very daunting to walk into a room, you know, with whatever, you know, person or situation or diagnosis that you're dealing with, and feeling like, holy crap, I do not know the answer to this. I don't know what to do. And that kind of goes, you know, with talking about the education requirements. I think that unknown element can be a really big challenge to help overcome, and just learning how to bite off very small pieces at a time, using what you know, and slowly letting that build until you realize like, oh, okay, I can get through this. But it can be really intimidating. And the same thing in working, I've worked with a lot of patients who are going through a lot of different, you know, whether it be physical pain or emotional trauma, because of their situation. And sometimes that will come out at you, whether they mean to direct it at you or not. And that kind of goes back to that compassion fatigue, with really learning to put on a professional front and realize that it's not about you, it's about them in that situation. And you're there to help. And sometimes people are ready to receive that help when you're there to give it, and sometimes they need more time. But it definitely can be a challenge to deal with kind of tough personalities in an already tough situation.
Right. Right. So what about the joys then?
Oh, I could go on and on about the joys. um, Human connection. If you enjoy relationship building, if you enjoy, really connecting with other people on a deep level, this is 100% a place for you to do it. Right now in working in pediatric care, and I work in home health. So I spend a lot of time in people's homes, with moms who aren't seeing anybody else during the day, who you want somebody there to just understand and give them a moment to brush their teeth or whatever it is. And so the involvement that you get to have in other people's lives, the intimate moments that you get to be a part of, I'll never forget a moment in working with an older gentleman who had a stroke, and we were working on regaining function on one side of his body, and he was very determined, and his wife was sitting there at the table with us, and the very first time that he closed his hand around a glass and brought it to his mouth, we all cried. I mean, I'd never seen a thirstier man in my life at that moment. So, those are beautiful, blissful moments that make everything worth it, that you would be hard pressed to get in any other, kind of position. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of struggle to get to that point, but then you just have this breakthrough moment, and it's more than can even be described through words. So, and, on top of that, another one of the joys is experiencing success through others. So, whether you're having a really bad day and maybe out of your 10 patients, 8 of them are in a really grumpy mood, those other 2 might completely save it for you because they make some big breakthrough or some big accomplishment on that day. And when they become proud of themselves, oh man, I can think of another woman I worked with after a hip replacement, and she had been a kindergarten teacher in her past. And one of the things we were working on is her putting on her own shoes. And, we shared so many laughs about how she used to teach that to kindergartners, how to put on their shoes. And now here I am teaching her how to put on her shoes, later in life. So watching other people succeed and having the connection with them through that moment is beyond all. I would also say, and especially, 2020 was what it was. For healthcare workers, it was a really, really big year. And although it was really scary in the beginning, when we didn't know much, and healthcare workers are still being called out there, therapists too, recovering from coronavirus for a lot of folks was a big challenge. But I will say a couple months in, there was this moment of just feeling so compelled to do this job, feeling so compelled to be out there and to be useful and to be valued, to hold a position that takes a lot of strength and a lot of fortitude, and that you worked so hard for, on the education front to get to, and watching that be celebrated was a really big thing. So I think feeling very purposeful, if people are looking for a profession where they can go out and know that you will make a difference in people's lives every single day, like this is definitely a job that gives you that kind of personal satisfaction. And then I think too, expanding your knowledge base, understanding health, understanding human anatomy, understanding how different people's minds work, and then too, expanding your worldview. Every place that I've lived, every setting that I've worked in, you work with so many different people and so many different cultures and, different ages, different races, different belief systems, everything. And so I think it really helps to give you kind of a meta view, of the world in some ways, and really giving you a different kind of experience that everyone's experience on this earth is so different from your own. And being there with people through those different experiences, watching how they go through it, maybe culturally, how they deal with different things, how they celebrate, how they mourn. But it's a really neat opportunity to have a glimpse inside a very personal element of people's lives that really just kind of expands your own mentality and expands your own ideas about people and the world, that in addition to, of course, all the medical knowledge. And I've watched some Grey's Anatomy, and I'll hear things and I'm like, yeah, I know what that means. Which is cool. But just the mental growth that you go through, whether it's, through your knowledge base or through your worldview, is a really great joy that comes along with it. And the longer you do it, the more that expands. Cause I still meet people that you're the only person I've ever met like this. You're the only person having this experience.
Right.
So the more people you meet and go through, the more that builds over time. But those would probably be my kind of key joys, but largely with them all kind of revolving around just involvement with people and usefulness and purposefulness in your daily life and in society.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a great explanation of both sides of it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think just hearing what you're talking about, it's very much like my own job, where I don't feel like that a day is the same.
No.
And with each individual day, with each individual thing that I do, it always presents a number of challenges, but it's also counterbalanced by the number of joys that I have
Mm-hmm.
in the
And I'm
things that I do, and also in what you do as well. So
And I'm sure you go through, in working with youth development, every kid you meet is different, and how you help them, how you push them along is going to be different. And so what that not only does for them, but what that does for you as a person is so big. And that's, it's very similar to what we go through as well. So you learn how to navigate a lot of different things and see things in very new and different ways, simply because you have to.
yeah. Yeah, kids are constantly, for me, the kids are constantly presenting me all kinds of new and different challenges and joys. Um, so, so I've got a couple more questions, and the last two questions that I have are very similar. So if you end up bleeding these two questions together, that's totally fine. But so the second to last question is for someone who might be interested in your career field. What are
Mhm.
some of the things that they can do on the front end to prepare themselves? And what I mean by that is like, um, if it's like you're working with an OT as just to be able to go in and observe or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And then we'll get into, and the last question is, are there any youth opportunities in your field?
Mhm.
So if young people want to be involved, what are some avenues for them for things for them to do? So
Sure.
if you want to answer those questions, that would be great.
Okay. So definitely different ways that you can prepare yourself. There are opportunities to shadow or observe therapists. A lot of times those are a little trickier to get into if you're not in a more direct path, like if you're not later high school or early college, really preparing to go into the field. But by no means does that mean that there's not ways to expose yourself. Ways to, it's funny, and not to plug 4-H or anything, but I do attribute a lot of my kind of path to becoming an OT was realizing that every summer I went to 4-H camp, I was pretty much working towards uh, all these different skill sets and, different exposures to different things. I feel like I was in moving towards being a therapist from the beginning without ever really knowing it. Um, you can definitely research and read about, plenty of books, plenty of shows, plenty of movies, plenty of documentaries that you can watch just to get an idea. I mean, I will watch My 600-Pound Life, and I'll watch their physical therapist come in and help them regain mobility. And maybe nobody else realizes that's who that is, but here we are, we're
Yeah.
everywhere. Um, if you have family that work in any kind of healthcare setting, maybe using that as an avenue, talking to them about it, getting a feel for what your different options are. I never really thought about going into healthcare because I just assumed if I didn't want to be a doctor and I didn't want to be a nurse, that there wasn't necessarily a place for me until you kind of expose yourself to what is out there. Um, take your sciences, start to learn biology, anatomy, physiology. Those are definitely things that you can start very early on. And if you're a person who is interested already in those sorts of things, then that's a first big step already under your belt, because there is a lot of scientific knowledge that goes into what we do. You can actually gain employment as a rehab technician, is generally what their role is called. I've had many in my day. It's a job where you can come in and you basically help therapists with whatever they need, whether it's setting up equipment, taking down equipment, cleaning, helping with just basic daily functions in a clinic. It's an awesome avenue if you're someone who is thinking that you're going to move into this field. You get the nitty gritty right there. You're in it all day. You get to see what the day is like. And then I would also say, exposing yourself, whether exposing yourself to people of different abilities, whether it be going to your local nursing home and doing visits, whether it be, tutoring kids in your school. I'm now working in Houston, Texas, where a large population that I work with is non-English speaking, a lot of Hispanic families. And, in high school, my Spanish teacher randomly pulled me into this program where we were tutoring middle schoolers and teaching them English while they were helping to teach us Spanish and helping them with their homework. Never knew how that was going to come back to benefit me someday in my later career. But, you just never know until you say yes and get out there. And so to kind of go into that question of youth involvement, the Special Olympics, great opportunity where you can volunteer, expose yourself to people of various levels of ability, elder care, helping to take care of your elder neighbor who, is maybe losing some of their physical strength or inability to do things out and around. That's another place for employment as well. People will hire personal caregivers, for their parents or their grandparents as they're aging, just to help them with daily tasks around the house. And that is a really great way to put yourself around people who have a need that you can help to fill, or a way that you can help to support their independence in their daily life. And that's essentially what we do as therapists. And I think it also helps to work down maybe some of the nerves that you have about being around people who may be different from you, or have a different level of function than you do. Because sometimes, especially people who are not necessarily involved in healthcare, you think everyone is kind of made of glass and very fragile. And then you get around them and you realize that we're all so much more alike than we necessarily think. And the funniest people in the world are under 6 and over 65. I will stand by that for my entire life. So, just putting yourself in situations where you're exposed to, whether it be older adults or adults with injuries, or, kids who have developmental disabilities, and realizing the similarities that we have, the strengths and the beauty that those people have and their life experiences that are so different from your own, ways that you can gain from them while also helping to give back to them, I think are really big. Big things that you can do, as a youth, just to mentally prepare yourself, kind of physically prepare yourself, and then gain the comfort of being around a lot of different types of people.
Well, it's really been fantastic, Emily, and you did such a great job of explaining everything. And to be quite honest with you, I mean, there's been, I've done these 4-H career conversations for over the last couple of months, and I've tried to choose so I started out with basically all outdoor careers and nature-based careers, because that's what I'm used to and good at. And then started to branch out into things, and occupational therapy was one of those things that I just didn't know enough about.
Sure.
So I appreciate you, if nothing else, explaining everything to me. We may be the only 2 people that actually watch this one, but I'll put it out
And
there.
everyone I share it with on Facebook.
Absolutely. So I am incredibly proud of you. Of course, you know that. And
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and end this one. And so my name is Eric Conley. I'm the Garrett County 4-H Youth Development Agent. This is Emily Dowd. She is an occupational therapist. And this has been 4-H Career Conversations. Thank you very much.